There's really nothing like it. Sitting next to your child when the lights go on and they realize the sounds that have been rumbling around in their mouth fit together to make words. The sounds mean something. They point to the word. The word means something. It's like breaking through a secret code and the world of reading opens up before them. Teaching reading is the most awesome, humbling, intimidating, joyous, exciting, amazing experience of homeschooling. But if we're honest, underneath the eager anticipation that most of us feel, we are also just a little bit scared and maybe confused. We assume it must be complicated because there are so many different types of programs. We know just how crucial it is. Worlds are unlocked for our children when they become readers. We also know there are kids who end up with reading issues, so there's that. We want to make sure that we get it right. As homeschoolers, we tend to equate reading with phonics and think of them as one and the same. There's also a tendency to conclude that teaching reading, or in other words, phonics, must be very complicated and difficult. You know what? It just isn't true. There is no need to view teaching phonics or reading as something akin to rocket science. I'm Janice Price, one of the consultants at Rainbow. In this video workshop, we will look at the various aspects of teaching reading, the methodologies, the programs, the research, and the occasional difficulties. Hopefully, you will feel much calmer as you approach this important, scary, and very rewarding teaching responsibility. Before we plunge into the depths of reading and phonics, though, let's take a step back and see how these skills fit into the bigger picture of language arts. As the name implies, and we've discussed in other videos, the language arts encompass all the skills associated with communication: reading, speaking, writing. These include supportive skills like phonics, reading comprehension, grammar usage mechanics, penmanship, vocabulary, and spelling, as well as composition, literary analysis, and public speaking. Reading is the starting place for it all. It's the foundational skill, the cornerstone of the building. So then we ask the obvious question, what is reading? The human mind works through many complex steps to translate the group of letters that we see into the words that we hear, or the other way around, to translate words that we hear into the combinations of letters that we see and recognize on paper. There is another whole set of complex steps that moves those words into the making sense part of our brain. We call that whole collection of complex steps reading. Reading is dependent on two cognitive processes. First, decoding, the ability to derive a word's phonological representation from the sequence of letters that represent it. In other words, to look at a collection of letters and know that it is a particular word, to hear it in your mind. The second cognitive process is comprehension, which is the ability to understand language, to make sense of the words we read. Reading material is made up of words, but words are made up of letters and sounds. Phonics is the process by which we sort out the letters we see and the sounds we hear and recognize that when put together in certain ways, they become words that we recognize because we've heard them before. Phonics and reading walk hand in hand, or at least they do much of the time. There is another approach to reading, however. Bypass the individual letters and sounds and go directly to the words. It starts by learning and repeating smaller words, gradually adding to the overall inventory of words that are recognized by the reader. In America's educational history, depending on when you lived, you might have learned to read using the King James Bible or Shakespeare in colonial times, or McGuffey's methods of memorization, recitation, and phonics in the 19th century. The first part of the 20th century saw the development of more systematic ways of teaching phonics, but also saw the beginning of the whole word reading, sometimes called look-say. So in the mid-20th century, you might have learned to read using the Dick and Jane readers. These methods all produced some good readers, but there have also been failures. Enough failures that ongoing debates over which methodology produced the best results have flourished for decades. Which leads us to the balanced literacy, or sounds-first literacy, which we have seen in the 21st century. This is a combination of phonics and whole word instruction. If you want to sink into a mire of phonics and reading research, all you have to do is start Googling. An overwhelming amount of position papers, programs, journals, and studies will surface. You might even stumble onto something called the Phonics Wars. Our goal here, though, is to simplify for you rather than confuse you. There are only a few basic terms to know and some basic criteria that is helpful for evaluating phonics and reading programs. So let's get those out of the way. The term research-based shows up all the time in relation to reading programs. This means that the creator of the reading program has sorted through a large amount of reading research and has based aspects of their program on that research. So what has all the research shown? After years of squabbling over whether or not phonics should be part of reading programs, there has been a growing consensus in reading research that reading skills include several aspects. In fact, some years ago, the National Reading Panel identified 5 pillars of quality reading instruction. The first pillar is phonemic awareness. Phonemes are the sounds that letters or a combination of letters make. Phonograms are the symbolic representation of that sound. For instance, B is the phoneme, the sound represented by the phonogram, the letter B. Some phonemes, though, are represented by combinations of letters. Dr, as in drip, is represented by 2 letters together, D and R. Ch, the ending sound in match, is represented by the letter combination T, C, and H. Awareness of these linguistic units is the first element of reading. In other words, it's knowing that BAT starts with a B sound and ends with a T sound. The second pillar is phonics, which is a slightly different skill. It involves knowing at least some of the rules that govern sounding out words, or in other words, decoding. We'll talk a little bit more about the different types of phonics instruction later. The third pillar is fluency, the ability to read with speed, accuracy, and proper expression, either silently or orally. The fourth pillar is vocabulary, the ability to decode, to know the meaning of, and to properly use a growing number of words. And lastly, the fifth pillar is comprehension, the ability to derive meaning from the printed word. These probably do not surprise you. After all, they are essentially the reading skills you want your children to develop. But there are lots of opinions on how best to teach these skills. Currently, the phonics or no phonics wars that waged for decades at the end of the last century seem to have come to a negotiated peace. Today, almost all reading programs will include some degree of phonics instruction. The discussion has shifted to how detailed that instruction needs to be. There is confusing information out there about phonics. You will see terms such as systematic, synthetic, analogy, all describing various methods of presenting phonics. We're going to take a few moments to sort out these terms, but we don't want to lose sight of the basic goal. We want to teach our children to read. We don't need to get mired down in debates about methods. We don't even need to know what method we are using. We just want to find the way that works best for our child and for our family. Hopefully, though, knowing a few of the terms will help us to identify the programs that will work best for us. Systematic phonics instruction just means that a set of phonograms is identified and is taught in a specific order. Systematic phonics is a general category. There are differences concerning how many elements need to be taught, in what order they are taught, and how they are taught. That means there are a variety of methods that are all considered to be systematic phonics. Some of the time, when the term systematic phonics is used, it means what educators call synthetic phonics. This sounds a lot like systematic phonics, but it's a different word and is based on the idea that sounds are synthesized or merged or blended into words. This is where students are taught to link an individual letter or letter combination with its appropriate sound and then blend the sounds to form words. This is what happens when you learn that st-op means stop. Some programs, like All About Reading and Spell to Write and Read, spend a lot of time at the beginning learning, repeating, and reviewing a growing number of phonograms. Various words or pictures depicting words might be shown as examples of either beginning or ending sounds, but the emphasis is on learning the phonogram and its sound. The list of sounds to be learned varies with the program, but can get quite involved with digraphs, trigraphs, and quadgraphs all being introduced and learned, not to mention the various vowel sounds and vowel combination sounds. Other programs, such as Abeka Phonics, start instruction by combining consonant sounds with short vowel sounds. Something like this might emerge as a day's lesson. B, a, ba, b, e, be, b, I, bi, b, a, ba, b, b, and then repeated, chanted, ba, be, bi, ba, ba, before continuing and repeating the process with CK and then D sounds, da, da, di, da, da, and so forth. Ending consonant sounds are only added somewhat later in the process. The same ending consonant is added to each, creating a series of syllables, words, and sometimes nonsense syllables, such as bat, bet, bit, bot, and but. In both types of systematic phonics, the phonics instruction is comprehensive and thorough. Review and repetition are key components. Most of these programs are committed to being multisensory and will incorporate songs, activity pages, and games. When researching systematic phonics, you will typically run into references to Orton and Gillingham. Dr. Samuel Orton was a pioneer in the treatment of reading failure and related language processing difficulties. As early as 1925, he had identified dyslexia as an education problem. Educator and psychologist Dr. Anna Gillingham worked with Dr. Orton to create materials for teaching dyslexic children. Believing that struggling readers learn best when taught through different learning gates, they created a multisensory method to teach the structure of the English language. Another characteristic of Orton-Gillingham phonics is a very specific order in which the phonograms are taught. The Orton-Gillingham influence shows up in many phonics programs because it typically produces strong readers and spellers. Okay, to sum up so far, we've found that systematic phonics instruction just means orderly, although not necessarily any specific order. Analogy phonics are also systematic, but this method takes a totally different approach. You will sometimes hear analogy phonics referred to as the word families approach, and it shows up in many strong phonics programs as well as in many supplemental materials. This method teaches students unfamiliar words by analogy to known words. Consonant and short vowel sounds are taught, introducing several consonant-vowel-consonant or CVC words like dog and cat. New words are learned by adding different starting sounds, such as bog or bat, and gradually introducing more advanced beginning sounds, such as frog and splat. In other words, this method recognizes that the rhyming segment of the unfamiliar word is identical to that of a familiar word, and then blends that known rhyme with the beginning sound of the new word. So, for example, the word brick is taught by recognizing the ICK, or ick, is contained in the known word kick. Analogy phonics typically starts by teaching a few phonograms and blending them into words, but then vocabulary is increased by adding words from the same word family. So in our example, sick, stick, slick, pick, wick, chick, and even quick. Reading practice is important in this method and plays a big role in introducing new words and supplying related context. Bob books, primary phonics readers, and even Dr. Seuss books employ these techniques. Both synthetic and analogy methods produce strong readers with a broad knowledge of phonograms and extensive vocabulary, and most importantly, the ability to decode new words by recognizing the sound segments and blending them together. While these two terms for phonics instruction, synthetic and analogy, will show up in the research and sometimes in the literature surrounding phonics programs, we prefer the more useful designations of intensive phonics and basic phonics. These are the terms you'll find on our phonics comparison chart, and frankly, we just think they make more sense. Intensive phonics methods teach all letter combinations as rules, and they are taught in a specific sequence, although the sequence might vary from program to program. The child consciously learns each rule and practices reading words derived from the rules. This is essentially the same as synthetic phonics. By contrast, basic phonics teaches a few basic rules to get the student reading stories quickly. These rules might or might not be taught in any specific order. Additional reading vocabulary is developed by exploring word families and adding phonograms as the student is learning to read. Analogy phonics programs fall into the basic phonics camp. Programs like Abeka, All About Reading, Spell to Write and Read, Reading and spelling through literature, primary phonics, and writing road to reading would be considered intensive phonics. Except for Abeka, these programs are all based on Orton Gillingham. Most of the other phonics programs that we carry would be considered basic phonics. These include programs like Jolly Phonics, Bob Jones Phonics, Happy Cheetah, and From Phonics to Reading, as well as many other programs. About now, you may be thinking, this is all very well and good, but I really just want to get down to figuring out what I need to use for my kids. So let's take a few moments to look at what you'll find in our phonics-based reading programs. First, there are what we call complete programs. These include systematic phonics instruction, either intensive or basic, reinforcing activities, reading practice, and maybe read-aloud suggestions. Often, all materials are tied together with a common theme. You see this in Phonics Museum, which has a fine arts theme that runs through the material. These programs are usually available in kindergarten, first, and second grade levels. They cover reading from introductory skills such as consonant and short vowel sounds through the syllabication rules and advanced try and quad graphs. In other words, skills that prepare the student for reading short chapter books. In choosing and using a complete program, your student will typically progress through the grade levels available and then move into either an anthology-based reading program or whole book studies. It's tempting to think of phonics skills as synonymous with reading, but the reality is that they are a gateway into other reading-based skills. After the focus on phonics in the early grades, reading skills then broaden to comprehension, experience with a wide range of genres, and reading practice. In upper elementary and middle school, reading lessons become literature studies, and literary analysis is introduced and explored, as well as written responses to literature. Among our complete reading phonics programs, there is a lot of variety in the order that the phonics concepts are presented, but a typical phonics scope and sequence would be something like this: consonant, then short vowel sounds, initial and final consonant blends, silent E, digraphs, and simple diphthongs, or in other words, vowel pairs. Syllable division between consonants, diphthong syllables, three-syllable words, compound words, and endings. Word families and three-letter blends, more difficult diphthongs and R-controlled vowels, soft C and G, silent letters and special sounds, and suffixes and irregular endings. Some examples of complete phonics reading programs are All About Reading, Bob Jones Phonics and English, Abeka Phonics and Language Arts, Horizons Phonics and Reading, Veritas Phonics Museum, Jolly Phonics, Primary Phonics, Spell to Write and Read, Reading and Spelling Through Literature, and Reading Complete. Some of these also include the introductory language arts, such as handwriting and simple sentence structure. Complete programs are typically the most expensive, but everything is provided for you: workbooks, lesson plans, lessons, practice readers, and teacher helps, which might include scripting, reinforcement, and drill activities. The next group of programs are what we call manuals. These provide complete instruction from beginning phonics through advanced syllabication, all in one book. In other words, the program is sequential rather than divided into grade levels. A student starts at the beginning and then works at their own pace through the lessons. A manual-type phonics program will typically include systematic phonics instruction, some reading practice, and suggestions for reinforcement. Sometimes there will be supplementary workbooks and readers or supplementary reinforcement activities and games. These programs are usually based on teacher-student interaction and are often scripted. A manual approach is less expensive than a complete program, but you might find you need to add supplements or to prepare reinforcement materials or to round up additional reading practice material. Manuals work well for some students, though, because you can move at their own pace and you can add in supplementary material as needed. Some examples of manual-type phonics programs are Alpha Phonics, Ordinary Parent's Guide to Teaching Reading, and Phonics Pathways. Probably the least expensive way to approach phonics is by using workbooks. There are some excellent series that provide systematic phonics along with some reinforcing activities. To round these out, however, you will need to provide reading practice, and you may need to provide some additional reinforcement activities. Some examples of systematic phonics workbooks are Explode the Code, Adventures in Phonics, and Plaid Phonics. Reading practice options are literally everywhere, at the library, on your own bookshelves, and of course here at Rainbow. In addition to decodable books like Bob Books or the primary phonics readers, and graded readers like Pathway Reading and Elson readers, there are also leveled readers in different subjects like Let's Read and Find Out Science, Christian Liberty's Nature readers, or the National Geographic and DK readers. There are differences between decodable readers and leveled readers. Decodable readers use words based on phonetic code the child has already learned. They include only a very few non-phonetic high-frequency words. Children are required to decode every word, and illustrations add details to the text. By contrast, leveled readers include many high-frequency words, often including repetitive text. They use context and picture clues for unfamiliar words. Both decodable readers and level readers are often separated into various levels. However, these level designations rarely correspond to grade levels. Sarah, one of our consultants, has recently completed a video that does an excellent job of sorting out the differences in these leveled readers. When you talk about phonics and reading, there are always exceptions. There are a few programs which don't fall neatly into any of the previous categories. Some of these have been very popular with homeschoolers through the years. Primary Arts of Language is a program from the Institute for Excellence in Writing that calls itself a blended sight and sound program. It's based on the teaching methodology of a seasoned educator who taught countless children to read. This program incorporates systematic phonics instruction, but it also introduces many words as sight words. Some of these are later shown to follow a phonics concept rule that is more advanced. Primary Arts of Language uses games for reinforcement. Happy Cheetah is a newcomer to the field, but fills an important niche. Working equally well with beginning readers and with struggling readers, words are taught in story context with phonics incorporated alongside copywork and comprehension activities. Lessons are short, and an encouraging learning atmosphere is stressed. A video with Happy Cheetah's author, Dr. Karen Holenga, gives more information on this program. Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons has been a longtime favorite in the homeschooling community. I've lost track of how many of my friends have used this program to successfully teach their children to read, and now I can add my daughter to the list. The manual provides a type of very basic systematic phonics. However, it does not get into the more advanced phonics concepts. The goal is to get children reading quickly. Many choose to supplement with Explode the Code books or a second grade level of another phonics program. Or you can do as my daughter has done and pick up with a manual approach for the more advanced concepts. The blue and red programs from Learning Language Arts through Literature provide systematic phonics, but they also include a rich language arts and literature environment. They even identify companion read-aloud library. Over the years, I've had the wonderful pleasure of listening to various grandchildren at the beginning stages of reading. We don't have a family favorite in terms of reading instruction, and several different programs have been used. The goal is always for that child to become a fluent reader and a lover of books, but the path is not always smooth. What about those times when everything does not work so well? It's painful when your third grader is still slowly sounding out words instead of reading chapter books. It's painful when your student keeps forgetting what was learned yesterday. It's painful when your student becomes discouraged because of their lack of progress. When I'm talking to homeschool moms, I talk a lot about the click factor. I know I should have a more scientific term, something that sounds just a little more, professional, but click works for me and seems to work for other moms as well. Children do not learn at the same speeds. If you have more than one child, you know exactly what I mean. Some children learn all the phonics rules, can sound out the words, and yet they are not reading fluently. Reading has not clicked for them. For these kids, sometimes the best remedy is a tincture of time, as my grandmother would say. Personally, I would couple that with lots of reading practice at a level that is just beyond comfortable. It's rather like your computer when the little circle is spinning. It needs time to process the data that has been put in. Our children sometimes end up in the same situation. They just can't take any more information in. They need time to process and get things filed away. One program that offers an interesting option in these situations is the Victory Drill Book. It's exactly what it sounds like, drill. Pages are based on phonics constructs that build on each other. The student reads one page per day, trying to meet a target speed of words per minute. They read the same page day after day until the target is met, and then they go on to the next page and start the process over again. When they complete the book, they start the book over again, page by page, with a faster target speed. This little program does a great job of building reading fluency. Now here's a newsflash. Children do not learn in the same way. If one program is not working with a particular child, you might try another program that teaches more to a different learning style. Jolly Phonics and Abeka Phonics use songs and chants to teach the phonics rules. Other programs, like All About Reading and Happy Cheetah, utilize a multisensory approach, adding a tactile element to the phonics instruction. Phonics Pathways and Primary Arts of Language incorporate games for reinforcement. Some, like Jolly Phonics or Horizons, have colorful components that are more appealing to some children. Children who have strong right brain learning tendencies are typically very visual and are often picture thinkers. The Easy for Me reading program, or materials from Right Brain Reading, help these children by designing letters and phonograms that provide a picture of the word. This makes it easier for these children to retain and recall the word the next time they see it. When your struggling reader is in an upper elementary grade or middle school, the situation becomes a little different, and you may need to consider several possibilities. If your child has spent time in the public school system, or if they have not been taught using a systematic phonics method, you might want to provide some remedial phonics instruction. Reading and Spelling, Pure and Simple is designed for middle school and older struggling students. Explode the Code workbooks can also be helpful in providing a thorough review of phonics concepts. Phonics Pathways is a manual approach that can provide phonics instruction for older children without being too babyish. Your child might have eye tracking problems. These can be very tricky to diagnose, even for eye doctors. If you suspect a tracking problem, have your child checked by an optometrist rather than an ophthalmologist and ask specifically about tracking problems. Some optometrists offer vision therapy, which can drastically improve not only reading issues, but other developmental issues as well. This brings us to the scary words, dyslexia and processing challenges. These are real, but perhaps not as common as we're often led to believe. Don't jump to the conclusion that your struggling reader is dyslexic, although you might want to keep your mind open to the possibility. For one thing, interestingly, the typical recommendation for dyslexic readers is consistent, repetitive, intensive phonics. Remember the National Reading Panel? It showed that intensive phonics provided help for disabled readers. In other words, even if your child is dyslexic, the best plan may be to continue doing what you've been doing. Another thing to remember is that there are varying degrees of these difficulties. Mild dyslexia might be approached in one way, while severe dyslexia would need a completely different approach. To get a professional evaluation or not is often the question. You will need to weigh the pros and cons of obtaining a diagnosis and the subsequent label that will be attached to your child. There are effective treatment paths for students diagnosed with dyslexia, for instance, the Barton method or an Orton-Gillingham approach. The same is true for those with processing disorders or who face right brain, left brain issues or sensory issues. In those situations, Diane Kraft's brain integration therapy is worth investigating. I would caution you about attaching any of these labels to your child without a professional evaluation and diagnosis. Being able to say that my child is dyslexic may make you feel better about delayed reading, but it may not serve your child very well in the long run. On the other hand, I have a good friend who is the mother of a severely dyslexic daughter. She was formally diagnosed in 3rd grade and was able to take advantage of some special programs, but her mother has mentioned that she wishes they had done the evaluation earlier. If you're the parent of an older, struggling reader, rejoice. Homeschooling is the best possible environment for your child. In the warmth and safety of your home, your child will not be labeled or fall through the cracks. Instead, you can give them the time they might need, or the additional attention they might need, or the special accommodations they might need, right along with the loving acceptance and encouragement that all children need. Your late reader can go to college, even graduate with honors. I've known some that have. Your dyslexic daughter can go on to get her master's degree. My friend's daughter did. Whether your experience is with a natural reader who catches on quickly, or with a child who has to work a lot harder, teaching our children to read is an awesome privilege and responsibility. There are wonderful resources and programs available. Enjoy the journey. And you, Mom and Dad, can have the satisfaction of knowing that you have unlocked a world for your children. Victor Hugo tells us to learn to read is to light a fire. Every syllable that is spelled out is a spark. Learning to read is a life-changing skill and an important focus, but our underlying goal in homeschooling should always be to forge and strengthen the discipling, mentoring relationship with your child. We never want to lose sight of that goal. Thank you for joining us today. If you have additional questions about reading and phonics, please contact us at Rainbow. Our consultants have prepared a phonics curriculum comparison chart that places many phonics and reading programs side by side and evaluates them based on the points we've talked about: type of phonics instruction, learning styles, available components, and notes on specific characteristics of each program. It is a helpful takeaway for anyone who is considering phonics or reading options. You can find this chart along with others by typing resources into the search bar on our website. You can reach any of our consultants by phone at 888-841-3456 or by email at consultants@rainbowresource.com or through the live chat feature from the website.